Today we're going to be talking about battery life because a lot of people ask about it. Welcome back, I'm Dave from Chase the Summit, and in this video we've got a pretty important topic that I've seen in the comments quite a bit. A lot of people have been talking about how they just got their brand new Fenix 7 or Epix Gen 2 or Instinct 2 or just about any Garmin watch out there, and their battery life isn't meeting their expectations. A lot of these watches from Garmin have some pretty incredible battery life specs, but if you've got them set up wrong, you'll never see the claimed battery life, and that's unfortunate. It's a little bit confusing. There's a lot of settings to go through, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video today. Before we dive all the way into this, I do want to thank the sponsor of this video, and that is PlayBetter.com. Check out the links down below if you're interested in picking up any of the watches in this video, because PlayBetter has awesome free shipping and a no-hassle 2-month-long return policy, which is pretty great as well. And while you're down there, you might as well hit that thumbs up and subscribe button too, because that really helps me out as well. Okay, back to the video. Judging by the title of this video, it's mainly going to be talking about the new Garmin Epix Gen 2 and the new Garmin Fenix 7, but these tips and tricks apply to almost all of the Garmins out there. It could be a Garmin Fenix 5 or even a Fenix 3 HR or something like that. For the purpose of this video and to keep things a lot less confusing, I'm only going to focus on one watch in this video, and that's going to be the Garmin Epix Gen 2 for two reasons: because it's got some pretty interesting battery specs and because the OLED display looks really good on camera, so I might as well use it. With that said, I'm going to push aside all of these other watches and we're going to focus on the Epix Gen 2. So there's two major categories when it comes to battery life. One category is going to be smartwatch or standby mode, and that's just when you're living your life, doing all the things, paying bills. Why would I say that? You're going to work, you're tracking your steps, you're getting text messages, you're tracking your sleep. All of that stuff kind of falls into this bucket of standby mode or smartwatch mode. The second category is going to be battery life during an activity when you're using the GPS feature, and that's where a lot of the battery drain can come from. We're going to talk about that a little later on this video. So let's go back to the first category and talk about standby time or smartwatch mode. Here's a few things you can do to maximize your battery life. One of the biggest things you can do to maximize your battery life is to adjust your backlight display. And this is more important on the Garmin Epix Gen 2 than it is on the other watches like this Garmin Fenix 7 I have here, because the Epix Gen 2 does have an AMOLED display. It's super bright and vibrant. However, it does take a lot more power than these older style displays. So on the Epix Gen 2, what you're going to want to do is go down to the system settings at the bottom of the settings here, click on system. Then you're going to want to scroll down and click on display. Now within the backlight display options, you've got three options. You've got during activities, general use, and during sleep. So you can customize the backlight for all three of these situations. Setting these brightness settings is a very personal preference thing, and you might want to sacrifice some battery life in order to get a brighter display in some situations if you have poor vision or something like that. For me, I tend to leave the brightness pretty low during sleep because I don't often look at my watch while I'm sleeping, and during general use, I leave it pretty low as well. While during activities, I like to boost the brightness a little bit. Another thing to consider when you're adjusting these brightness settings is either turning on or off your always on display. The always on display on the Epix Gen 2 and something like the Garmin Venue 2 takes a ton of battery. So this is an option I tend to leave turned off. And there's one more consideration to think of when we're talking about the backlight display on these watches, and that's going to be the backlight timeout. This is almost as important as the brightness. The timeout basically means how long the display stays on for when you raise your wrist or press the backlight button. So by default, it comes out of the box with 8 seconds, but you can go as low as 4 seconds. However, 4 seconds isn't a whole lot of time to get all the information you might need, so I like to leave mine on 8 seconds. But if you end up dialing this all the way up to like 15 seconds, or on the Fenix 7, you can go all the way up to like a minute, that will take a big toll on your battery life. So leave mine on 8 seconds. You might want to leave yours on 8 seconds, but again, you're going to want to play with this to see which one suits you best. Like I said, the backlight brightness on these watches might be the biggest factor when it comes to battery life, so don't take that one lightly. Really try to decide how much backlight you really need, what the timeout should be, and if you really need that always on display, because that's really going to help you squeeze the most out of the battery life on these watches. Next up, we got to talk about watch faces, because here's another one a lot of people overlook when they're trying to optimize the battery life on these watches. A great feature about about these new Garmin watches like the Fenix 7, the Epix Gen 2, even the Instinct 2, and all of these other new Garmins is that you can customize the watch faces on these devices. And what's really cool about this is you can actually go onto Garmin Connect IQ and download additional third-party watch faces that are fully customized from other developers, and there's hundreds out there to choose from. Even though the watch face feature on these watches is really cool, there is a pretty big consideration here when it comes to battery life. And it's that A, some of these third-party watch faces are not optimized, so they actually take a lot more juice than you think to run them in the background. And B, if you have other things enabled on the watch face, you can actually suck down a lot more battery life than you actually know about. First of all, any watch face that has a moving animation on it is going to be a huge battery drain, because the way these displays work is that they only refresh the display when they need to. Basically, it's a static image up until the point where some new information has to be displayed, and that's when the watch says, hey, I need to refresh my display and show the user something. But if you have a watch face that's continually has an animation going, that could be the second hand on an analog watch face, it could be a second countdown, it could be a little animation around the perimeter of the watch that shows the seconds counting, or it could be just an animation of like Mario, I think I've seen that out there, moving around the display, which is really cool. Unfortunately, it'll take a whole bunch of battery life in order to use that watch face. So for me, I tend to stick to the default watch faces that come out of the box with just about any watch, because typically those are the most optimized to get you the most battery life. I know it's kind of boring, but if you want the most battery life, maybe consider that. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is the SpO2 sensor on the Garmin Fenix 7, the Epix Gen 2, and a bunch of other Garmin watches, because this is also a big battery drain that people don't consider. So if you flip your watch over, you've got this fancy heart rate sensor on the back here, and built into that is an SpO2 sensor that Garmin calls PulsOx. And PulsOx is a blood oxygen saturation sensor that gives you how much oxygen is in your blood. Now, there's a couple of settings for this sensor. For instance, you can just go in and manually trigger a PulsOx reading, just like I'm doing here. It's not going to work because I'm not wearing it, but this will give you a reading on the go when you just want to know your blood oxygen saturation level, and that might be valuable if you just traveled from like sea level to 10,000 feet or something like that. Alternatively, you can also dive into the settings of the PulsOx sensor here and then put it on during sleep, or you can put it on all day. Now, these two settings are going to take considerably more battery life, because that PulsOx sensor is going to turn on all throughout the day or all throughout your sleep, and that is an additional sensor that kicks on top of the heart rate sensor with an additional red LED, and that does take a lot more battery life, so you will notice a big drain if you enable that. And like I was just saying, it's not something most people even need, and personally for me, I train at basically sea level, so it's not something I even look at. Now that we've talked about some of the more obvious things to change to maximize your standby battery life, let's talk about some more nuanced things that you may not think of. First of all is disabling your Bluetooth antenna or the connection to your phone entirely. To disable your Bluetooth, you basically just go into the settings here, scroll all the way down to the connectivity option here, click on connectivity, and then click on phone. And now you can see here it says status connected. But if I click my top right button here, it says status off. Now, by disabling the connection to my phone, I disable the Bluetooth antenna, and it's not going to be continually communicating with my phone to send notifications or to get sync with Garmin Connect or to do any of those things. So yeah, you're basically crippling your device to maximize the battery life, and you should only do this in a pinch or if you just don't want notifications on your phone at all. And of course, when you resume the connection by turning it back on, all the things in the background will trigger, so you'll sync with Garmin Connect and your steps will update to Garmin Connect and all that stuff, so you're not really gonna miss anything about your daily wellness or step tracking or any of the calories burned or all that stuff. On the topic of connectivity, let's talk about Wi-Fi for a second here. So if I dive down and click on Wi-Fi, you can see here that mine is currently turned on. It also allows you to download maps from the map manager and download music from Spotify. There's a lot of uses for Wi-Fi. However, if you're not somebody who is downloading maps or is somebody who uses Spotify, or you're somebody who just has it connected to your phone, so you don't really need another way to upload to Garmin Connect, you could turn off Wi-Fi entirely and probably not even notice a difference with your device. The final tip I want to mention in terms of smartwatch battery life is battery saver mode. So if you go into your quick dial up here, or quick menu, whatever they call it, you can scroll around until you see something that looks like a battery icon with a little plus on it. And right now it says battery saver off, but if I click this button here, I turn on battery saver mode, and it says battery saver disables the phone connection, wrist heart rate, and other sensors. So with battery saver mode on, I've just increased my battery life significantly with one click of a button, and it's because I've got this battery saver profile all set up. However, you can see now my really cool watch face I just had is gone. It's now a very simple watch face that's only got the time and date and the battery level. And if I scroll down, you can see that some of my sensors have been entirely disabled, just like the optical heart rate sensor, the PulsOx sensor, body battery is now disabled, and some of the other features of the watch. That kind of wraps up the standby time or smartwatch side of things. Now let's talk about maximizing the battery life when it comes to GPS activities, like going for a run or a ride. All the things we just talked about with backlight brightness and timeout and all of that stuff still applies when it comes to GPS activities. There are a few other considerations though, and there's one really cool tool on some Garmin watches like this Epix Gen 2, the Garmin Fenix 7, the Garmin Fenix 6 has it, I think the Forerunner 945 got it, and it's called Power Manager. Power Manager can be found in the settings right below navigation here, and if I dive into it, you can see I've got a few options here. I've got my battery saver profile, which I can dive into if I want to customize that any further, or if I scroll down one notch, I've got power modes. Power modes can be fully customized to your needs, and the Garmin Fenix 7 and Epix Gen 2 come with a few out of the box. You can see some of the defaults here: extended battery life, max accuracy, and jacket mode. Now below all of these, there's another option for add new, and you can dive in here. And here you can name your own power mode. I'll just call this one A for now. Then I'll click the check mark here. And now I can go in and fully customize how I want the power used in my Garmin Epix Gen 2. You can do things like change your satellite systems. So by default, it uses the default settings in your system settings. So the options are turn off. That'll turn off GPS entirely. And that gives you an extra 47 hours of battery life. And the really cool thing is that right below the text, you can see GPS only, all systems, multiband, etc. There's a little gray subtext there that tells you how many additional hours of battery life you'll gain by changing this setting. So if you turn it off, you get 47 hours of extra battery life. If you go to GPS only, you get extra 10 hours. All systems is plus 0 hours because that's my default setting. And if I go to my max accuracy mode or multiband mode, that's minus 12 hours. Now, if I scroll down, there's the music option. The Garmin Epix Gen 2, the Fenix 7, the Fenix 6, they all have music storage built in. However, another consideration is that using the music on these watches is a huge battery drain again. And this is a very dramatic one, to the point where on this Garmin Epix Gen 2, the best battery life you'll get in GPS mode is about 42 hours. But if you decide to play music during that time, it drops all the way down to like 10 hours. So it's a huge battery drain. And for me, it's just not worth it. And you get the idea here. As I scroll down this list, I can turn features on and off depending on if I need them or not for my activity to maximize my battery life. So I've got the wrist heart rate sensor, the PulsOx sensor, the map, you got the always on display setting here, the brightness settings, and accessories. This could be an ANT Plus or Bluetooth heart rate sensor or something like that. Depending on the sensor, could potentially take more battery life than you expect. The really cool thing about the Power Manager is after you make all of your selections on what you want to be turned on and off, you can scroll back to the top of the Power Manager page and see at the top there, it actually gives you an estimate of how much battery life you can get using this profile. And for me, this says about 32 hours of use. With the Power Manager out of the way, let's talk about a couple of other considerations when it comes to GPS on battery life. First of all is broadcast heart rate on any of these Garmin devices. So there's a really cool feature in this Garmin Epix Gen 2 and a bunch of other watches called broadcast heart rate. If I dive into my settings here, you can see I can turn on broadcast heart rate on or off by clicking this button up here. And what this does, it actually sends out a signal of my heart rate to any surrounding device that can pick it up. So for me, I like to turn that on when I'm running on the treadmill so I can see my heart rate right up on the screen of my treadmill and I don't have to look at my watch all the time, which is kind of nice. Now, even though it's a useful feature, if you're using this when you're out on the trails, when you're running or you're road running or something like that, and you're not using the broadcast heart rate feature with any other devices, you're just wasting battery life. So make sure that is turned off by default and only turned on if you absolutely need it. Another quick tip when it comes to maximizing your GPS battery life is to use the resume later function. So you can see here, I'm in an activity, this is a running activity, and if I decided that I got to an aid station in a race and I wanted to take like a 10-minute break and just take a nap or something, I could pause my watch and then just go and chill and take a drink and relax and stuff. However, right now my watch is still eating a bunch of battery life because it still has a GPS connection when it's paused. But if you go ahead and click save and resume later, I can stop the activity entirely, goes back to my watch face, I can turn the backlight off, and now the watch is doing nothing extra. And when I want to go back and start my activity again, I can just dive in and I'm good to go. So if you're gonna stop for a long duration of time, whether that be to eat lunch or to eat a snack or set up your tent or whatever, you might wanna consider using the resume later function instead of just pausing your activity to get the most battery life. All right, friends, I know all of that was kind of dense. There was a lot to cover there, and I feel like I went through it a little fast, so I might have lost a few of you. I hope I didn't. If you made it this far in this video, you probably enjoyed it, so I'd really appreciate it if you went ahead and give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel down below, because that really helps me out. And as always, I probably missed a few things here, and if you've got some quick tips on how to maximize the battery life on your Epix Gen 2 or your Fenix 7, drop down in the comments down below and let us know what you do to maximize your battery life, because I would love to hear from you, and I'm sure the community would too. That's all I've got for this one. I hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful in some way, and yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.